In today's video, I'm going to show you how to make the easiest strip quilt ever. Hi, I'm Jamieson-Hirst of Chatterbox Quilts, and today I'm going to show you how to make this quilt, which is made with 5-inch wide strips of fabric. Now, what I used for these are these stash builders, and they're from Island Batik, so thanks so much to Island Batik for providing me with this fabric so I can show you how to make this quilt. So what a stash builder is it is 5 individual little rolls of 5-inch wide strips of batik fabric, and each roll has, I think it's 5 different fabrics, either 5 or 6 different fabrics in it. And these little packages are 2.8 yards each, and there's just a variety of different batik fabrics in here. So you can see from the ends here, looks like little cinnamon rolls or something like that, right? But you kind of get an idea of what fabrics are in there, and then as you look on the edges, you can kind of see as well as you go along. So what I did is I used some of these fabrics to create this strip quilt. And I want to talk a bit about why this is so easy to do. Well, first off, you're dealing with 5-inch wide strips of fabric. And by the way, not only do I like these stash builders for making this type of a project, but they're great for using for foundation paper piecing projects, applique, because you've got quite a bit of fabric there. And with that long length, because these strips are more than 40 inches, or probably more than 42, about 44 usually, it gives you a lot of fabric to use. Also, because they're 5 inches wide, if you cut them in half, you get 2.5 inch wide strips, which is perfect for binding, or even if you want to use it for sashing, or maybe a very narrow border, for example. So lots of different uses for these stash builders. But one of the things I really like when I'm using these is the fact that I can make this quilt as long as I want. So all I'm doing is taking each strip and I'm sewing it together along the long edge, and I'll trim the edges. If they're a little uneven, I'll trim those afterwards. But I can keep adding and adding and adding 5-inch pieces of fabric until I get the length I want. Now, I did mention the width, which is, let's say, 44 inches. So if I want to make them wider, I can do that. I can add borders along just the sides if I wanted to. So this particular one here, I know you can't see all of it, but this one here is actually 13 strips. And what I did is I took my strips of fabric, I sewed them together. I've got green at either side. I know you can't see the one, but green at either side. Then I kind of went red, blue, pink, blue, kind of pink colors. So it's kind of alternating between a kind of a bluish color and a pink or red color. And then I put another bright green in the center. So these are all different fabrics in this one, but there are different things you can do with them depending on what fabric strips you have. So I want to talk to you about that. But before I do that, I want to say a really big thank you to my Patchwork pals. These are quilters who are members of my Patchwork Pals YouTube membership, and their monthly subscription helps to support the Chatterbox Quilts YouTube channel. So thank you so much to them. And if you're interested in becoming a Patchwork pal, just click on the join button below any of my videos. You can get all the details. You could even become a Patchwork pal today and enjoy all the wonderful perks that come with membership. Now I want to talk about some options that you can do with these strips when you're making this type of a quilt. So you can see I've just put those strips all together. That's the easiest one, right? But there are other options. So once you've got your strips sewn together in the length that you want, you can cut this piece of fabric, because that's what it is now, in half perpendicular to those seams to give you 2 sides. And then you could insert a different fabric in the center between the 2 of them, perhaps a solid if you wanted to. And I would also rotate the one side so that you don't have the same fabrics running across. I mean, you could if you wanted to, but I think it's more interesting if you rotate them around and then you get a look like this where you don't have the same fabrics joining up across that center piece of fabric. So it gives you a very interesting look, very easy and quick to do as well. Something else you can do with this, if you didn't want to put the strips together like this, is you can create a jelly roll race with type quilt with them, and it comes together much quicker because in a typical jelly roll race you're working with 2.5-inch wide strips. For this particular one, you would be working with 5-inch strips, so it makes it much quicker. Now, if you don't know how to make a jelly roll race, let me quickly show you how to do that. When you're making a jelly roll race quilt, what you do is you take your strips of fabric and instead of stitching them together along the long side, you stitch them together along the short side. And again, you can add as many strips as you want. So I've got a few of these strips already stitched together, so I can show you what happens next. And yes, there does get to be quite a bit of fabric that's hanging around when you're stitching doing this, but that's okay. The result is worth it. So what I would do next is I'm going to start joining the very end of the strip to the very beginning, but you want to cut off some of that first strip. If you don't, you end up with the seams all lining up, and we don't want that. So you cut off about 18 inches of the first strip. You find the end of your strip of fabric, and you start stitching it together. So let's say we were starting here. Okay, now I'm going to start stitching them together along the long edge. And I continue doing that. And as you can see, as I go along, my seams are not going to line up, which is great. So I don't have to worry about that. You continue doing this, and what you'll end up with at the end is a loop of fabric, like this, for example, which you'll just clip. And so now you would have fabric that looks like this. You're going to start doing the same thing. You're going to bring all this around, and there'll be two strips stitched together. At that point in time, let's say something like this. Trust me, it looks better than this. But you'll have the fabric something like this, for example, and you'll be stitching, these two will be stitched together already, these two will be, and you'll be stitching the long edges again. So very quickly, this is going to work up into a good sized quilt, depending on how many strips you added in there. And if you want more details on making a jelly roll race quilt, check up above or in the description below, because I'll put a link in there for you. All right, so that's another option that you can make with these kinds of strips. And as I said, if you want to keep it super, super simple, just start stitching them together along the long edges. And if you're doing this type of a quilt, there's another option I wanted to talk to you about too, to make it a little more interesting. So what else you can do here is you can play around with the strips and how you arrange them. So if, let's say, for example, you have duplicate strips, that might happen sometimes, what you can do is you can play around with how you arrange them. And what I would do is I would lay them out. Let's say we have 13 strips like we have here, sort of the same sort of setup. What I would do is I would take my strip number 1, and I would lay out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 7 is where I would stop. Then I will go back down, and I will go 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I think that adds up to 13. Check my math. But if you do that, you get a result that looks like this. So it creates a bit of a pattern in the quilt itself. So that's rather interesting. So you can play around with the arrangement of these strips. You might even want to do a gradient. Maybe you have a lot of the same type of color. Maybe you can go from a light color to a darker color, or maybe you can alternate like I did in here, where you're going from, red, pink to blue, and just keep alternating them as well. So you can make these quilts look really interesting rather than just, throwing any old strips together. So there's lots of options for what you can do with this quilt. It's very easy to whip up, and if you need a quick gift, this is the quilt to make. Thanks for watching today. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and remember to subscribe and hit the bell so you'll be notified the next time I release a new video. And for more helpful quilting information, be sure to go to my website at www.chatterboxquilts.com.